Ой, у лузі червона калина похилилася, чогось наша славна Україна зажурилася, а ми тую червону калину підіймемо, а ми нашу славну Україну розвеселимо. Ой, у лузі червона калина похилилася, чогось наша славна Україна зажурилася, а ми тую червону калину підіймемо, а ми нашу славну Україну розвеселимо.
Oh, yes, the Matt Kwasiborski show calling you live and direct from Washington, D.C., where it is a wintry night out there. It's kind of foggy, a little cold, a little blustery. But here we are, February 6, 2023. We are finally doing, at least I am finally doing an international podcast. It's been a really long time since I've done one. There's reasons for that. There's a lot of it is just my own insecurities of able to do one, trying to get on there. I feel like everyone that is an expert on what's happening in Ukraine and in the East. And you know what? I've had a lot of experience over there, if you guys know, moving forward in this way, and a lot of experience working over there, living over there. And it's just time. It's time. We are 49 weeks ago. Russia launched an unprecedented attack across the entire country on the 24th of February to the morning of 24th of February, including trying to take the capital, Kyiv, trying to decapitate the government there, President Zelensky and his team, and failed to do so, and is now holding on to a town in the east called Bakhmut that the Russians are trying to win over by throwing a meat grinder effect, and we'll go into experience what that is. First, before we get started, this is the Matt Kwasiborski show. I had some good podcasts on Friday. Had one with Jacek Spendel of the president of Liberty International, a good friend of mine, stretching back for almost 15 years now. And then, of course, Dave Rizzo on Saturdays. We talked about the state of the NFL during Super Bowl bye week and my Philadelphia Eagles taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. It was a good podcast, kind of laid back, and, it's kind of lull before the storm. And before we get started, I'd also like to thank Al Gore for inventing the internet. I'd like to thank Speaker Podcast Platform for hosting this. And, of course, all the loyal listeners out there has been downloading the podcast over the past couple of years. Before we do, though, get into Ukraine, we do want to send, thoughts and prayers aren't right, but anything and everything you can send to the people of Turkey, Syria, and in that region that was affected by the devastating earthquake that happened around 4:20 a.m. local time in Turkey. If you're over here in the United States on the East Coast, that's probably around 9:30 last night, coming in 9:30, 10:30. And just a magnitude of, I think it was like 7.8. In the aftershock, it's 7.5 on the Richter scale, which is an unprecedented aftershock. The videos going around on Twitter, on YouTube, on the media that you see. I watch CNN International. It's the only international news that I see almost every day on TV, and it's just devastating. Someone said it's just like watching buildings collapse like Legos when the foundation is moved under it, or a sandcastle being knocked down. Almost like dominoes, in a way. I would say dominoes, and just to the thousands and the hundreds of thousands of people affected, the millions, it's just, heart goes out to them. The humanitarian effort that has to be underway is going to be unprecedented. The loss of life is going to be unprecedented. And as President Erdogan said, it happens every 100 years or so. The last major earthquake like this was 1939. I do remember one in 1999. That was pretty devastating as well. Seems the Earth have shifted its platonic plates a little bit. As Kazakhstan had a 5.4 earthquake, the kind of like an aftershock, and then there was also one in Taiwan at about 5.4 as well. That was reported about 2 or 3 hours ago. So that's in usually way what happens is that you have these just tremors around the world, and who knows, and where it's going to go to next. If this is going to be a series, earthquakes over time usually happen in series. And let's just hope that the worst one is gone for the rest of the world, and we can kind of recover and things to go out there. And an important player in the Ukraine war with Russia has been Erdogan, who has been able to negotiate several agreements between Russia and Ukraine. One of the main ones being that be able to get the ships out of Odessa to export the Ukrainian grain going forward into the Black Sea and getting out to the Ukrainian partners, especially after Ukraine recaptured the famous Snake Island, one of the very first parts of Ukraine that was under attack, a small island in the Black Sea, where the Russian warship comes up and tells Ukrainians to lay down their arms. And of course, the Ukrainian soldier to this very day, very famous, would go and say to go fuck yourself to the Russian warship. And that becomes a commemorative stamp, and around the world has become just a call sign for the very first opening days for that important, small but very important strategic island, as Russia has been forced from that island over the summer, as well as many, many parts of the occupied territories that it had taken on its initial assault. What I would call I wouldn't call it wasn't the initial it wasn't the invasion, it was the extension of the invasion in a more aggressive way that we have. What we've seen since pretty much the last month or two, since we've had the Catholic Christmas, also Orthodox Christmas, is that the West has finally decided to come together and convince Germany to send the Leopard 2 tanks that will provide, or fast maneuverable tanks around Ukraine that will provide quick strike action force, and they're just easy to maneuver than the tanks that the Russians are using that are basically been manufactured since World War II. Also, the talk that the United States is sending the Patriot, at least one unit of the Patriot air defense system. If you grew up in the Gulf War, you understand what the Patriot missiles were. They were very strategically important against the Iraqi Air Force when defending in Kuwait back in 1991, not the more recent one in 2003. As well as other countries coming together and sending weapons and aid and military equipment. But the issue is, one, training the Ukrainian soldiers on these modern weapons. Ukrainian soldiers, for the most part, have been trained under Soviet weapons and weaponry, including air defense systems and missiles and all of this other equipment and tanks and cannons and all that other thing. So it takes time to train the soldiers to how to operate these equipment. They have to do it very, very fast, very, very quickly. There's a cohort of Ukrainian soldiers in Oklahoma right now in the United States that are being trained on the Patriot systems. Some will have to go to Germany and Britain and learn how to operate the Leopard tanks to see if it is time in Russia for what it's doing. There is rumors of a possible massive assault on the country that we saw 49 weeks ago, almost to the night, when we woke up in the morning to the Ukrainians woke up at 4 a.m. their time to missiles and helicopters and planes flying overhead and trying to take all of the country. There's a lot of news and chatter and rhetoric and sort of an agreement that Russia is building its forces, whether that is in through Belarus in the northwest part of Ukraine or to the south and the east. It seems to me that a lot of the forces being built up by the Russians are coming from the east in Bakhmut. And I've also read reports or have seen reports where Putin has ordered all of the Donbass to be under Russian control by March. Either that's March 1st or by the end of March, whatever have you. And those areas will constitute the ones that Putin proclaimed to annex back in September 30th. That would be in Kherson, Lugansk, Donetsk, and the other provinces. They're basically along the southeast part of the entire country of Ukraine, which would then cut off Ukraine's access to the Sea of Azov, which was a strategically important part. However, as we know, Ukraine was able to liberate the city of Kherson back in November of 2022, where that city has now become under shelling every day by Russian forces just across the river. But the important part is all the Russian forces militarily have been forced across the river. There's a small island also in that river that the Ukrainians have controlled, and that really stops the forces of Russia from regaining that territory. In terms of what a larger assault could be on the country, I am at a loss to understand what that could be. Is it going to be another massive missile attacks that we have not seen very many missile attacks in the last couple of weeks? almost stretching back, I think, to the middle of January when Russia unleashed the last parts of the missile barrage attacking critical infrastructure. Kharkiv has been under a slow, methodical attack. There was a missile attack that landed at a university, a very important university of economics or some sort of economic university in Kharkiv, which is about 25 miles or 50 kilometers from the Russian border, just to attack it. Didn't just took the top off of it, so it's inoperable. They hit several civilian buildings as well as the center of town. And you wonder if Russia's now strategy is to take out Kharkiv, if not Kharkiv, Kherson, in the way that it did Mariupol. I have a hard time believing it will be able to do that in Kharkiv, mainly because you have to put tanks in there. Kharkiv is the second largest city, albeit a large Russian-speaking city for the most part due to its close borders with Russia. However, it has been able to withstand any sort of Russian advance on it, both in 2022 last year and also going back to 2014, when Russia first seized Crimea. It also tried to snatch Kharkiv, which it failed, Odessa, which it failed, and Donetsk city itself, which it failed, and Mariupol back then, which it failed to do. So without sending in tanks, it can only lob so many missiles, only to terrorize the people of Kharkiv and the citizens there. Not sure if the attack or the assault would come from Belarus as well. That failed the first time when they sent in large convoys of tanks and supply military equipment, also military vehicles in from coming down through Belarus, through Chernobyl area, into and tried to take Kyiv from the north. That dramatically failed. So you really don't know what Russia has in store for it, but it definitely is a race against time, I think, for both Russia and Ukraine. Of course, in a war, it's always a race against time, correct? But I think what Russia is trying to achieve is, first of all, take as much land back and destroy as many cities as possible in the Donetsk, in the Donbass. Bakhmut has been under serious bombardment pretty much since last summer, and Russia has had no territorial gains really since last summer. Bakhmut has been contested. There's ideas that they're in control, or rumors that they're in control of the city, but there's no one left. There's hardly any residents left in Bakhmut. Volvodar is another city where people have just fled. They're trying to take that over. That is a key city that's north of Mariupol. Controls a railway line between Crimea and Ukraine, which gets supplies in and out for the Russian military. One of the reasons that the Ukrainians tried to go back to Kherson is try to cut off these supply routes. And I think what's going to go down in history when Ukraine wins, the history books are written and Russia is pushed out of this, is the Ukrainian tactics for warfare against a larger force and a larger power in Russia. And they're a larger country with a much larger population, and with more artillery and more weapons to assault Ukraine with. But the Ukrainians have been strategically superior in that they're attacking the Russian supply lines. They're trying to not only their supply depots, their ammo depots, and that has forced the Russians to kind of be isolated within Ukraine, unable to resupply their forces either with artillery, with food, with rations. They're just kind of left there, and there's no way for the Russians to get the supplies there. And that was the major issue, and the reason why Ukraine could take back so much territory, especially the Kharkiv region or Oblast, as well as the cities liberate the cities of Izium and so on and so forth, where we see more mass graves there as well. I think what's going to happen is that what I'm not hearing about, I should go back to this, is that the Western countries have to get the supplies into Ukraine, i.e. these Leopard tanks, the United States missile systems, the other missile systems, the Caesars coming from France, the British military and what's coming in from there in terms of tanks, missile systems, and air defense supplies as well. And I think for now, the only way to go through is along the same corridor that people are traveling to Ukraine, and that is the trains from Poland. I do know that there is now train service between Ukraine and Romania. That is a little bit strategic, but it's also more perilous because it has to go through Moldova and Transnistria, which hosts a Russian base there. So I think that would be another way to get supplies in there, especially to protect the southern parts of Ukraine, including Odessa. The very, very, to me, the crown jewel, if Russia is going to take anything, it should be Odessa, due to the ports, due to the location of it on the Black Sea. And therefore, that would allow Russia to cut off Ukraine's way to export anything out of through the Black Sea, since the Sea of Azov, which lies further to the east, is not accessible to Ukraine anymore, which would basically make Ukraine a landlocked nation, almost like Belarus. And that would be strategically important for the Russians to be able to do so, but they're not. They're not going to be able to take the Black Sea. Romania has stepped up its patrols of the Black Sea, I'm sure, which means NATO has stepped up its patrols of the Black Sea as well. So those areas are not really realistic for the Russians to control. If the Russians want to take the Donbass, they will have to take just basically deserted cities that they have destroyed and leveled to the ground, inheriting a sparse population. And are they going to repopulate it with Ukrainians that have been stolen and sent to and exploited, stolen out and sent to Russia, and then put them back in? I don't think that's a reason to do that. But why is Russia destroying these cities? And what is their goal of doing that? Like, what is the sense to destroy a city that's very strategically important, like Mariupol? Well, they can end the history. One of the ideas is they want to end the idea of Ukraine as a nation and wipe it off the map and absorb it into Russia, absorb Belarus back into Russia, and create a mini Soviet Union again. Of course, it won't be called a Soviet Union, or it won't be communist in that nature. They can rebuild it. If you've ever seen the awful destructive pictures of Grozny in Chechnya, they leveled that city. They raised that city over years and over a 5-year period, and they rebuilt that. And they've rebuilt it into a more metropolis. I don't want to say thriving city. I've never been, but it's definitely not the same Grozny as we saw from the 90s. They're willing to do that. They're willing to do that in eastern Ukraine. I do not think they're going to be able to go to Kyiv and do that, achieve that. I do not think they're going to be able to do it in Kharkiv to be able to do that. And I don't think they're going to be able to do that in Odessa either, nor Lviv all the way in the west, close to the Polish border. I just don't see they on the ground to send the tanks in that far and that deep into Ukraine territory. Won't happen unless there's somehow they're able to, they've improved their conditions and improved their logistics and improved their military, their strategic plans to be able to destroy and locate Western weapons, Western tanks, the HIMARS, the rocket launchers, the Leopard tanks, also the Bradley tanks that the United States are sending into Ukraine as well. Just don't see that happening. What you are seeing right now is not really a stalemate. The reports out of Donbass to the further east is that the Russians are intensifying their efforts, and this could be the push that they are rumored to. This could be the beginning of the push that they are rumored to have underway. Basically, they use the meat grinder approach. They just throw those conscripts, they throw the prisoners that the Wagner group, the terrorist group, throws, and just throw them at waves and waves and waves of just human cattle fodder at the Ukrainians. The idea there is that it will exhaust the Ukrainian ammunition. It might exhaust the Ukrainian soldiers, and they might be able to take, and some of those Russian conscripts might have success here or there, defeating some Ukrainian forces along the way, and that makes it easier for the Russians to kind of roll in, especially if the Ukrainians don't have the ammunition. One thing that you stop hearing about is, what is the state of affairs of the Ukrainian ammunition, their military warfare, the HIMARS rockets. The Russian city of Beograd, which lies just on the other side of the border with Ukraine, has been coming under fire. There's a huge military depots there, ammo depots there have been coming under fire. There have been drone attacks on Russian bases deep within Russian territory, especially a base called Engels, ENGLES or ELS, where apparently the kamikazes and the Russian bombers who were sending those missiles in to destroy the critical infrastructure were attacked. It seems that the Iranian drones either have been exhausted or they're just waiting to send them all in one huge wave against the critical infrastructure against Ukraine. Russia continues to target at Dnipro and in all across the eastern parts of the city just civilian buildings, killing innocent civilians while they sleep at night, knocking out hospitals in Kherson, destroying universities, which is a center of learning, cultural centers, and so on and so forth. And it's really just an act of terrorism, terroristic warfare. I do believe Russia and Putin and the decision makers believe time is on their side. Time is on their side. They are refighting World War II in their minds. They are refighting it, and they're trying to reposition the result of World War II, then the fall of the Soviet Union. They're trying to rewrite this into the fact where Russia is the sole winner of this, whereas they're the ones that liberated, and they want to take over all of Europe and the security apparatus and think they can knock the United States out of Europe, which will not happen, will never happen unless something systematically falls apart within the security apparatus or the United States is destroyed by nuclear weapons and nuclear bombs, which is also not going to happen. I think it's a nervous time if you are a supporter of Ukraine because you're really not sure what the Russians are really planning. We do know that their first attempt to take the majority of the country failed miserably, so what else do they have? What else is left in their arsenal besides tactical nuclear weapons? I do not think that Russia is going to use tactical nuclear weapons within these cities. And what is the point of sending nuclear weapons into Donbass? What are they trying to achieve? First of all, if they set off a nuclear bomb in there, I don't think they care about what the rest of the world thinks. But that land will be uninhabitable, going in to take the resources of Ukraine, which are lithium deposits, coal deposits. Ukraine is rich in minerals towards the east. What is left there to do, and plus the residue. If a huge windstorm comes, it could blow that radioactive gas and air and cloud over Russia or over NATO countries. I just don't see the Russians really going to take nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons were not built for your enemies or your adversaries that are in very close proximity to you. We did not build nuclear weapons to bomb Canada or Mexico. They're there to deter Russia and the Soviet Union, places that are far away. And the same with Russia in the sense of building their nuclear weapons and their nuclear bombs. They do have them, tactical ones, that the United States really doesn't have in terms of deploying them. They can deploy them. They talk about it all the time on Russian state TV of bombing not only Kyiv, but let's go to Poland, let's go to London and Paris and just bomb it all. And somehow a great Russian world will emerge from that. It's idiotic in the sense. But what is Russia really trying to achieve? Russia has time on its side. Russia hopes that Western politicians, and you're seeing here in the United States, that they're going to get tired of funding Ukraine with weapons and money and weapons and money. The Germans took a very long time to decide to send their most effective weapons on the ground. That's the Leopard tanks, as we talked about. And now we need air defense systems. The air defense systems are something that Ukraine wants, and they also want fighter jets. And for me, give them all they want. The newly elected Czech president, Petr Pavel, former NATO commander, as well as military high up that fought in the Balkan Wars. He actually is a hero as he rescued, I think, 30 French soldiers or 30 French humanitarian aids workers in the Serbia and Bosnia. He said, give Ukraine all at once and give it to them now. And let's just stop this bickering because it's only a matter of time before we start to lose the momentum and the support for Ukraine and for what it is just politically and economically. In the United States, we all know that the Republicans have gained control of the House of Representatives, which controls the spending. Now, it doesn't control that. They can't stop the Pentagon from sending weapons or money to Ukraine, but it can stop future bills that are marked with aid to Ukraine and hold those up. It could do that unless it barters for things that they want to get out of the bill. So it will be kind of interesting when those things come to a head. Those have not happened yet as the House is sort of shaping into form in terms of who's on what committees, as well as looking at other and who's on what committees. removing people from committees, adding people to committees, and things like that. So it's going to take a little while for the House to settle down. So there still is that great window of opportunity for the United States to get there and to keep sending the weapons and the supplies to Ukraine and the humanitarian aid. But it just feels like there's a nervous time. This time last year, it's understandable. This time last year, the world was watching as Russia continued to amass troops along the borders of Ukraine, either to the north, to the east, to the south, as well as through Belarus. Many leaders were going to meet with Putin, the famous meetings of the long tables with Macron and Scholz, where they had to sit at these enormous long tables due to Putin and his intimidation of his supposed guests, his supposed allies and guests. And when I say allies at the time, Macron thought he could talk to Putin in a reasonable way. So did Scholz. And then it just didn't matter. Then there was just the national security meeting of Russia that I believe was taped, was filmed on the 20th of February or 21st of February, and then was replayed for the nation. And then we remember the United Nations Security Council gathering the night in the United States on the 23rd into the morning of the 24th. Like, it's happening. How are we going to do this? How are we going to defend this? What's going to happen? How fast will Kyiv fall? Kyiv did not fall. Ukraine did not fall. Ukraine has survived. Ukraine will survive, and Ukraine will win. There just don't see, unless the West is willing to see Ukraine turn into what I would say is like Syria. If the West is willing to see city after city being bombed, not only deliberately, but slowly bled out, to where Ukraine is not really a functioning country. You cannot call Syria, outside of Damascus, a really functioning country. In fact, there's battles that are being waged in there between the Turkish troops, the Syrian troops. The Russian troops are still there. There are American troops that are still there, and battles are still being waged against the Kurdish population, trying to gain foothold or gain influence within that country. I just don't see if the world will be content, the Western world will allow Ukraine to turn into that. There is the fear that that's going to happen. There's the fear of people that have supported Ukraine over time, in terms of civil society, developing of the civil society, how to root out corruption, how to improve the democratic processes within Ukraine, and kind of bring it closer to the West, even economically, that all that effort is lost and is all for naught. And I don't think so. It's right now, it can be strengthened, to be honest. It might not be able to be strengthened throughout the entire country to where it breaks away right now, but it can be strengthened for the future. There will be a future of Ukraine that is prosperous and free of Russian tyranny. Within Russia itself, it's the war. You see reports of people that support the war because they believe in the whole neo-Nazi false narrative. And then I think it also wears the Russian population down as well. But there are pockets of people that do not support this war, that do not believe in sending, especially males, to the front lines. The conscription notice is vastly different than what we have seen. These are no longer, people who are joining the military voluntarily or doing their service. These were men that were kind of giving orders. You were told to report to your local police, to your local military police, to your local military barracks, and serve and being thrown on the front lines. And they all knew they're going to be cannon fodder because Russia doesn't care. That's Russia's strategy, is to throw as many human bodies as possible to wear out the opponent. In boxing, this is called rope-a-dope. Muhammad Ali, the great champion that we've had in America, that was sort of his tactic. He would just let his opponent punch and punch and punch, and then all of a sudden just go in after the guy was worn down and tired, and then would go in for the knockout or for the win or for the TKO. And that is something to what Russia is doing by sending cannon fodder. But it's a little bit different than a boxing ring. You're sending men to be murdered. You're sending fathers of children to be murdered. Sons, grandsons, university students. You're sending people that could be the future of Russia just sent off. Sending prisoners to the front lines, basically saying you have 6 months, or, you have 6 months. If you're still alive, they'll grant their freedom. That's also not happening. There's a Wagner officer that defected to Norway said that's not happening. they will beat you. They will kill you if you don't decide to serve again. They don't want to send the people back to tell the story of what's really happening, what these guys could be doing. I'm sure some of them gotten back, gotten free, things like that. But it is a very, very dangerous and chaotic situation that Russia is employing. And it's not a system. It looks like there's no systemic strategy to the deployment of the troops or what they're doing. We keep lying in wait. And I think we have to not lie in wait. I think we know what they're capable of doing. Outside of launching kamikaze drones around the country or missiles here and there, they don't have the manpower to withstand, invade, and occupy Ukraine. Does Putin really think that if he got to Kyiv and murdered Zelensky and his cabinet, that he would be able to put a puppet or Yanukovych back in and things would calm down? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There would be trench warfare within Kyiv trying to get to that person. Wouldn't even be able to get in to Kyiv if somehow the worst part of Zelensky's fate came true in terms of him being murdered and capitulated. Not capitulated, cut your head off. If those kinds of things happen, I don't understand what Russia's trying to do, how they're going to exhaust this, and why they're fighting this war. But it's too late. Russia is not going to give up. Putin is not going to back down. He's used Syria as a pretext for how he would fight this kind of war. But what he's also facing is it's a little bit different when you're bombing a country like Syria that has no real cultural ties to Russia outside of the Orthodox Christians that live in Syria, and there are. Ukraine and Russia have a tremendous amount of cultural ties over time, including the Orthodox religion. Yes, there's been a separation. I understand that, but that's part of it. Just living in next door to each other. There's commonalities. It's like between Canada and the United States, there's commonalities. We're different countries with some parts in way different languages. The French Canadians in the Quebec province to the Spanish-speaking parts of the United States as well, and so on and so forth. American football is not the same as Canadian football, but there are similarities to it. And I think what that's leading is to a lot of there's a lot of, I think, internal conflicts within Russia, within the hierarchy. And you saw it with the Putin chef, Prigozhin, who's founded the Wagner Group, and it seemed to me like there's a power struggle between Prigozhin, Kadyrov, the head of Chechnya, so on and so forth, the warlord of Chechnya, and Putin. Like, they want to unleash the hounds. They want to unleash the nuclear weapons. Like, just take this over and let's just conquer it, occupy it like this is the Middle Ages. And it's not going to happen. This is modern warfare. The Ukrainians have shown how to survive. They've shown how to fight Russia to be beating them right now. You could say what you want about the gains of Bakhmut, but those gains for Bakhmut are more symbolic for Russia than they are strategically important for Ukraine. But Ukraine will continue to fight because it holds off whatever could happen. If Ukraine just backs off and gives up Bakhmut, then the Russians can storm even closer, and that's not the goal right now at all for Russia, and that's all what the Ukrainians want. But they do want to hold off as many as they can and trying to overtake parts of the Donbass, which is the point of what Russia is trying to do. There is, within the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, it looks like the defense minister will be resigning or replaced due to a high corruption scandal within the Ministry of Defense in terms of overcharging for the meals sent to the military, and which people were siphoning off millions of Ukrainian hryvnia, which is their currency, and pocketing the difference and overcharging for what they were given to the military. So they're charging the Ukrainian government more money than they should have been charging in order to feed the soldiers of the front line. And it looks like the Ministry of Defense is going to fall and replace with their national intelligence chief, Berdyov, who, by the way, great article about him in the Post a week ago, a young guy, he's like 37. He served in the special forces. He was commended for many behind enemy lines battles in the Donbass in 2014, and he was the only one who correctly believed that Putin and Russia would try to take Kyiv in the early morning of the 24th of February, where no one else apparently within the Ukrainian chain of command, including Zelensky, believed that. They thought that Russia would just concentrate on bombarding the east to try to take over the Donbass, which seems to be the sentiment within the intelligence gatherings and shared around the world with Ukraine, that is what Putin is going to try to do. How he does that, how he's going to do that, we do not know. If they're all of a sudden building troops, they're massing troops again, but do they have the wherewithal to do so? Will the HIMARS come in enough time to be able to cut off the supplies to them, to the Russian soldiers, and will Crimea eventually be liberated, which is the sentiment around a confidence within the current Ukrainian hierarchy that Crimea could be taken back by the Ukrainians at the end of summer 2023. And if that is the case, that would effectively remove Russians. They would have no chance to be able to send troops in a very systematic and convenient way for them to maintain some sort of strategic advantage over Ukrainians. Russians have learned how the Ukrainians are fighting, and they are going to exploit those weaknesses as well. Like I said, I don't hear reports, and I don't think you'll ever hear reports of as if the Russians were able to cut off the supply lines, the major supply lines, especially of the Western weapons entering Ukraine, or not. That really is something that's not mentioned, is not talked about, is not even an idea for Western supporters. Because if that's the case, then the West will lose they will lose a lot of Western support from the governments. That if those supply lines are indeed cut and not repaired, and can't get the weapons in there, then Ukraine's pretty much left to its own devices at that point, which would not be the ideal scenario. Now, Ukraine was left to its own devices in 2014, and to my belief that they fought, a ragtag army fought the Russian army to a draw. They stalemated it. They could not push into Kharkiv or Odessa. They were able to take more of the east and the occupied territories, but the amount of territory they occupied was way less than what Russia thought they could get in winning the hearts and minds. And going into the invasion 49 weeks ago, the further part of the invasion is that they thought they could win the hearts and minds of Ukrainians again. Zelensky's numbers in terms of popularity were low. People were fed up with the government, with corruption, and it's like it's always been the sentiment in any place that if you talk to common people, they're especially in Ukraine over time, they're fed up with the government and corruption. That has been over time. That has been the sentiment. I'm not saying Ukrainians were never hopeful for a future, but for the common people and what they've been through since Russia decided to invade in 2014, militarily at least invade, the sentiment has been it's been a long slog. Utilities, the cost of living has risen due to the collapse of the currency and a war economy, and things weren't developed along the same ways that maybe it was before that the war started. And going forward, it has been the corruption. It has been the standard of living has fallen, but the spirit is not broken. And that is what Russia is trying to do, is to break the spirit and the will of a country of 42 million probably now, maybe down to 40 million for the people that have left the country, mainly women and children, obviously women and children only that have left. And Russia has not been able to break the spirit and the will of the Ukrainian people. Wintertime is here. It's settling in. February is cold. There are tons of, hundreds of thousands of people that are without power, without running water throughout the country. A lot of these places, that's been sort of the situation since 2014 in the East, without consistent electricity, without consistent running water. Now it's on a larger scale. Doctors are trying to work under lights. Students can't go back to the university because they're being bombed. People are having hard time sleeping, and they don't know when they could be the next target. And that's designed to wear down the will of the Ukrainian people. I don't know what Russia expects from wearing down the will. The Ukrainian people aren't going to storm Kyiv and the presidential palace and the Verkhovna Rada, which is their parliament. They're just not going to do it. You don't see that happening anytime soon. And the faster that Ukraine and the West is able to train these soldiers, get them back to Ukraine to fight with these weapons, this war could be over relatively soon, sooner rather than later. But as I mentioned, Russia believes it has time on its side. Putin thinks he'll be in power to 2036 if he's still alive. A lot of rumors going around about how many doubles they're using and green screens, that he's sick with Parkinson's and pancreatic cancer. So until you see a funeral, the guy's alive, in terms of that way, in terms of what he can do. It's just been a lull. I think there's a lot of planning and strategies going behind closed doors. Putin has put back in power and control his general, I forget his name, Sermayov, I think is his name, is back, or Gerasimov, who's now back in charge of the war against Ukraine, and is trying the one that is responsible for furthering the cause of the Russian cause, which will not go much farther. I think on the 24th or leading up to it, are they all of a sudden going to start storming it and send airplanes? They're going to be detected. The United States, the Western allies are on the ground, embedded with Ukrainian special forces. The CIA has been embedded with in eastern Ukraine since 2014. There's articles in the New York Times. Just Google that. I'm not telling you something you can't find online. And studying the way the Russians fight, we already know how they're going to fight. They're going to keep lobbing missiles. That eventually has to stop. But I think the Ukrainians have figured out where they're coming from, especially the planes. They have to go after their target, whoever's launching from the Caspian Sea. Those are the ones that attack Kyiv, and those are the ones that attack also Lviv. And they have the ones launched from Belarus, which, like I said, there hasn't been a major missile launch trying to target critical infrastructure in quite 3 weeks. Like I said, in Kharkiv and in other places, there have been bombings and missiles this week, but they were targeting more of the Ukrainian way of life. It's a tense time. I think about, the friends that I have over there, the former students, former partners, whether working with universities, whether working with NGOs, and how they're living and how they're surviving and what could be waiting for them on next. I think that's really something that you think about. Anyone that knows Ukrainians or any people that have spent time in Ukraine, and I'm not talking about, hey, let's just go in and see Kyiv or Lviv, but really spend time there, get to know the people and a little bit about the culture. And I just scratched the surface during my time there from 2013 through 2019. I didn't live there for 6 years, but off and on, traveling back and forth between Prague, Kyiv, Lviv, Odessa. And you just want they deserve to live in peace. I do believe that it's very similar to the American Revolution, with the main difference being that there's no ocean it doesn't take, the Russians don't have to cross an ocean to reach Ukraine. And Ukrainian has a functioning in their independent government. That's how they're different. But what Russia is trying to do is put into a puppet government that will be democratic in name only, but subservient to Ukraine and how it controlled Ukraine in the Soviet Union, and how Russia and the Soviet Union would control countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, etc., that lived behind the Iron Curtain for about 50, 60 years, 70 years, I think, 1945 to 1989. Yeah, so about 45, 50 years there. That's what they want to do, and that's what they're trying. And Ukraine and Georgia, Kazakhstan, they were under the Soviet Union from 1920s, and that was one of the reasons for Putin to go in, was the 100th anniversary of the Soviet Union, which is now past. And trying to recreate the past is just something that's strange to me. We all want to. There's always part of us that wants to go back to our childhood because it was an innocent time. And it seemed like we were, America, any country was stronger years ago. But then you go back, if you look at America, people want to make America great again. They would go back to the 50s and the 60s. I'd say right up to about 65 and back. And it's like those people back then wanted to go forward, or they thought other times went back, even past the Great Depression. Oh, they had the worst in the Great Depression. We have to become toughen these people up like that. And then they go back to the Depression, go back to pre-World War I, where America was the industrial capital of the world. So you want to go back to innocent times because you don't remember the hard times. And with Russia is trying to recreate the end of World War II is trying to provoke World War III. And it's just, they're just not going to be able to do it in the way that modern warfare is fought. They underestimated the Ukrainians, severely underestimated the Ukrainian spirit, their will, and the technology. They underestimated that the United States, while experienced a catastrophic collapse in Afghanistan, which was not just Joe Biden, by the way. That goes under President Trump, who decided to negotiate with the Taliban, who were a fascist, dictatorial, religious fanatic government. They were fascists in that way. And that's what the Taliban is. They're just under the cloak of religion. With that, the other thing too is Ukraine and Ukrainian people have chosen democracy as their way of life. They want to be democratic and free. They look at Poland to the west, and they look at Romania to the south through Moldova, and see the modernization and what the sense of being along to the EU and to NATO brings: prosperity and peace. It's not a perfect system. No, there is no perfect system. But it's a system that can bring about peace and prosperity as long as they're left to their own doing and they deserve the right to choose their own freedom. They deserve the right to choose their own path in life, like we all do. We all do. And that's what we want for Ukraine. And that's what we want. In the next coming weeks, it is a perilous time. If something is going to be unleashed, it will go back to what I said about a year ago. It will be when the Euromaidan was in its final stages at that time in Kyiv, which is February 18th to the 21st, and the February 18th to 22nd, February 23rd is the defense of the Fatherland Day in Russia. But back to the 18th to the 22nd is when the violence really peaked and ended in terms of Kyiv. That is when on the 20th and 21st, the then President Yanukovych ordered the Berkut and the special forces of Ukrainians' internal police, if you will, to fire and murder 77 civilians in one day on the streets of Kyiv in the capital. The EU ministers, foreign ministers, and leaders met with Yanukovych to try to get him to pull back, to sign this peace agreement, and then pretty much the Russians were trying to, the head of the KGB was trying to persuade him to send the tanks in and crush the rebellion, or the people are going to murder you. Instead, Yanukovych fled. A caretaker government was put in for about 2 or 3 months, which led to the election of President Poroshenko in May of 2014, but also the annexation of Crimea, and sort of began the more kinetic military war in eastern Ukraine. So those are the dates that I kind of think will be, so we're looking at about 12 to 14 days. In the next 12 to 14 days, I think, are when the uptick is going to happen as the Russians prepare whatever they're preparing, and if they are preparing. But it seems to be that intelligence reports around the world are saying that there has been an uptick. We're seeing more Russian troops amassed on the border. We're not 100% sure what they're going to be doing and how they're going to assault Ukraine. I think they're going to first try to solidify the control of the east, put more pressure on, not without taking Odessa, but put more pressure on Odessa and be able to do that. And it'll be the way Ukraine responds, if the HIMARS are ready for that, if they're in there to attack. I do not see a full-out on assault on Kyiv, again, because it's an abject failure, because even if they somehow took out the leadership of Ukraine, which would be President Zelensky and his cabinet, they're not going to be able to physically fly someone into Kyiv and occupy Kyiv. There's just no way they're going to be able to do that, or occupy it on the ground. Kharkiv could be a target. I really don't think so. I think there's enough defense forces along that front, because you haven't seen the Russians try to retake the land that they lost in September in outside of Kharkiv. That sort of fortified Kharkiv in a way in terms of a land invasion with tanks. Obviously, he's not protecting it from missiles because the air defense systems aren't there. Will the Russians try to take Kherson City? That is a possibility. They have in control. Will they go further into Dnipro? Will they try to go after Poltava, which are strategic cities that lie to the south and east part of Kyiv and getting more to the south central? The song that I play is Slavna Ukraina, which is a nationalistic song, and it just really touches my heart when I hear it sung. It's very, it grows on me. It's something in my brain that I can walk down the street and sing it, and it really shows you that the effect that Ukraine has had on me over the years. And when I say sing it, it's in my head almost every day. And it's just, you wonder if it's a calling to do something greater and to do something worthwhile than what I had done, what I've not really been doing because of my own insecurities and fear, but also my motivation to do something better and what to do. And the discussions are there, the ideas are there. Now it's just time to execute it. It's been the Matt Kwasiborski Show calling you today. It's about 50 minutes into it. I just wanted to say, give a little report on what I think is coming. Basically, it's just reading the news, but from what I think, if Russia is going to do something, it'll be the 18th to the 22nd of February. I think it'll be concentrated more in the south and the east, and I do not think they will have success without unleashing a barrage of missiles. And when I say barrage, like hundreds of missiles towards those areas, as well as maybe towards some other strategic areas that we have not seen them attack in quite a long time. So again, this is the Boombox with a mix from the Army remix. Boombox is a famous Ukrainian group that has toured the world singing the song. They went back to fight. They're touring again, and I think they're actually in New York City coming in early March. So I'm just going to play it again from where it was. Been the Matt Kwasiborski Show, calling you live and direct. I want to thank all my loyal listeners out there, and we hope to be on again on the podcast soon. Been the Matt Kwasiborski Show, calling you live and direct from Washington, D.C. Remember to inspire the inspiration. Do not wait for the inspiration to inspire you. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. And again, thinking about all of the victims in Turkey, Syria, and the surrounding areas after those devastating earthquakes in that part of the world today. Hearts, thoughts, prayers, whatever you can do to support, definitely do that, even by posting awareness on your social media. Also brings light to the people who may not, be aware of it, but need to be reminded of it in this fast-moving, fast news cycle of a world. Have a wonderful time, everybody. Bye.